Welcome to Transformation with Martine. Conquer everything and compromise nothing. This show brings you real, raw, and vulnerable conversations. If you have never liked small talk and have been on a personal growth journey for a long time, stay tuned as Martine and her guests share empowering stories. Now is the time to own your past and look toward your future with hope. Believe in your dreams, and all that you want to achieve is possible. Transformation Coach Martine helps you accept and love you for you. It's time to listen to your heart and tap into your unlimited potential. You have the answers you need inside. Sometimes you just need the right guide to help allow transformation to happen. Transformation with Martine starts now.
Welcome everyone to Transformation with Martine, where we overcome everything and compromise nothing. My show is about hope and the resilience of the human spirit. And the guests I invite on here have been through quite a lot, and they're here to share their stories. And my show is just real, raw, vulnerable conversations. There's no scripted anything. We just have a conversation. So happy Friday, everyone. My show, for those of you who don't know, also is every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And today I have a special guest who is part of our book here, Win the War on Wellness, with Peggy Williams and Dr. Marcus Wetstein. And we are contributing authors to this fabulous second book in this series. Welcome, Joanna Baanana.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So I do have to say it. I am one, people would be wondering if that is your last name. I think it's so creative, and there's no way anybody would not remember you.
So it's actually my pen name. I go by Joanna Baanana. I have a DBA for it, so I can do business as Joanna Bennett or Joanna Baanana, as opposed to my real last name. I thought it was clever for marketing purposes, website purposes. It's just a little bit more memorable. And I'm hoping that, if somebody sees the name, reads the book, they want to learn more and know more, and it'll be easy to look me up on the internet.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you're not going to forget it. Plus, it's just cute, it suits you. It's just cute.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've always used that name just as a nickname in a way.
Yeah.
I've had it as my Facebook name for probably almost 20 years. And there are people in my real life who just call me Banana. Like, that's just a nickname of mine too. Yeah. So it's just something that's easy to go by. If somebody called me that, I would turn and look, because I have been called that several times.
Yeah, I love it. I do. So your story is called The Fruits of My Struggles. And I was just like, there's so many things, like the fruits of my labor, the fruits of, what made you come up with the name, and give us a premise, the background.
Sure. So it's funny, I actually wrote my piece and I sent it off to Peggy to edit it and take a look at it to make sure it was kind of in line with what she was hoping I would write. And she came back and said, I think Fruits of My Struggle would be a good title. And I'm like, why would she just come up with that? Like, I didn't even give it a title yet. And I was kind of a little salty. And then I read it and I was like, oh, I actually used that exact line in my text. So she found that line and took it out. And it's one of those things, I feel like, which happens a lot in writing. Sometimes you write things in a stream of conscious and you have no idea like exactly what you're saying. It just feels good. So you write it because it feels good. But it actually, when I took a step back and looked at it through her lens and her choosing that one phrase, it just seemed absolutely perfect for what it stood for. I do definitely think a lot of the struggle that I've gone through in life has brought me to a place that I never would be if I didn't go through those particular moments. So I'm grateful for that. And I mean, I also I'm a gardener, so I love the idea of fruit. I have lemon trees, I have trees. So just in general, it just kind of fits all together with who I am. So I loved it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's interesting. Peggy's very gifted in writing and pulling things out of people and all that. Because I know the first book, my first chapter that I did, it was kind of, cathartic, as a lot of people said. It's like, ooh, just looking at things like, okay, this is going to go out like in a book. This isn't just like me telling my story here and there. It's like, it's going out in a book. And she's like, I don't know if you want anything really dramatic, but this is what I suggest. And I'm like, yeah, I had to sit on that for a little bit. And it was kind of the same with the second story. Like, I need to sit a little bit on this, but yeah, I think that's good. That feels right. you know? So yeah, I can understand you kind of like pausing, like, you know, is that right? Does that fit me? So yeah. I noticed as I was reading your chapter how we have a lot like books in common. The Body Keeps Score. Oh boy, I'm not quite done with it yet, but I started it a while. I have to take, I've got to absorb a bit,
Yep.
take notes, because that's one you definitely have to do. And then I love reading Young Pueblo stuff.
Yes.
Yes.
And in a similar vein, I've been on an Amanda Lovelace kick, who's another poet, a little darker in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
but I read all, I think she has 7 or 8 books in her series. I've now read all of them.
Okay.
And Rupi Kaur is another one who I adore, poetry-wise. But Young Pueblo really got me into poetry. And his book, Inward, was the first one that I read kind of in my transformation journey 4 years ago. I don't even know how it came onto my plate. I don't know how I found it. But I ordered it on Amazon in February of 2019, and reading it just like opened up my eyes and changed my mind on so many different things. I felt like he was really able to put a window into my own soul. Like his words kind of made me look into myself in ways that I had never even thought about. I mean, I grew up in a very in a big mindset with like you serve others. Like as a woman, you I'm Italian American, so that's kind of the women cook and do the dishes and do everything, and the men do whatever they need to do. And I kind of grew up in that environment. And when I was reading the Young Pueblo book, I'm like, wait, I should be happy. I should find out what I like I matter. And once I started like unfolding some of that, I realized that the world was such a bigger place than I had thought it was.
Yeah, that's interesting when you find that point, you know, that you have value too, that what you want matters. Because I never thought as an abused kid either, just like something like, oh, somebody would actually want to hear what I have to say because nobody did before, you know. So that's an interesting place to find. And I know my coach told me about the Body Keeps Score because she's like, I started that not to help my clients. She goes, which is most of my books that I've read, which is me. Most of my books I read is for my client. But she says she wanted to understand herself better. And that's when she turned to that book. And so I've tried to look at those, a lot of things like, well, if I'm helping myself, I can surely do a lot better than if helping others. If I, you know, learn the value here and then being able
And
to
one
help
of the
others.
So I had started therapy for myself kind of in that same time frame, and my therapist said, oh, you know, I heard a lot about this book, maybe you would find it interesting. So that's when I opened up The Body Keeps the Score, and it was so helpful for me to be going to therapy on a weekly basis at that point, because I would finish a few chapters like you said and kind of like unpacking it. But I had a safe place. Like I would bring it with my little highlights and my notes, and I would talk to her about it. And a lot of things that I don't think I really grasped so much growing up. And I guess you don't really when you're in kind of chaotic situations. But theater was always such a big part of my life growing up. Like I was in the play at school. I wasn't really a big athlete. I wasn't very good at sports. So I found my little niche in the play. And when I was a senior and I was in a really big school with probably like 700 kids in each class, so times 4, I was the lead in the school play. So that was like a big population of kids to be like the number one in the play. And when I read The Body Keeps the Score, there's a chapter that talks about theater helping kids find out their emotions and delve into different emotions and be able to do it in ways that you're not really focused on yourself, but you're still embodying the specific emotions and you're still being able to work through it. And I thought how powerful that what must have been for a younger Joanna, that I had no idea how transformative that really was in my life. And reading that kind of threw me for a loop. And that was one of the biggest parts I kind of delved into and kind of worked through.
You know, you just mentioning young people, because as part of Lisa Nichols, she has, you know, motivating the masses, but also motivating the masses for the teen spirit. And one of the things I remember seeing an interview with a young man, well, young boy, really, he was probably about 14. And he says he found through being on the MTM's campus was that he could be excited for a friend not making the football team, or I mean, be excited for himself making the football team and sad for his friend not, and to actually have both those emotions and be able to be okay. You know, I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, totally.
You know, so So tell us your story, how you got started on your own journey.
My story. So my story starts out. I was born and raised in New Jersey, and I
Hmm.
moved up to Connecticut probably 12 years ago now.
Hmm.
I had met at the time, who I was married to, my ex-husband. He was in
Hmm.
New Jersey too. We'd known each other since we were younger, and we didn't want to raise our children in that environment. So we kind of moved up to Connecticut because we thought it
Hmm.
was a nicer place to have a family. I had family up here, so we weren't going to be alone, and it kind of just seemed like the right move. After a while, things obviously happened. No need to go into extreme details, but it kind of got dangerous and scary at one point.
Hmm.
And my children were young; they were 3 and 1, and I knew that I had to get out of that situation. At the
Hmm.
time, it was for them. It had nothing to do with me. I just, like you said, when you grow up kind of in a chaotic situation, you don't realize all the pieces in play. But I could
Hmm.
see my children's, like especially my 3-year-old at the time, I could see the reaction she was having and the questions she was asking and the things she was
Yeah.
doing, and I did not want to repeat any of the patterns that I had,
Right.
which was the whole point and reason for us to get past that and to move past that.
Hmm.
So I took a leap. There was one incident which I talk about in my story where I had to call the police. Once the police came, that was my big red flag. You are going to take a break. You are going to get out of this situation, and you're going to make it better. And at
Hmm.
the beginning, I really, really did think that I was going to be able to do enough therapy, do enough every single piece of it, just to be able to
Hmm.
make everything better. And we could do it together. And I was going to do therapy. He was going to do therapy. We were going to do
Hmm.
therapy. And we were all going to be able
Right.
to come together in this big, loving circle of healing. But I realized through my journey that I was only responsible for what I was going to do. I could not
Yes.
control what he was going to do, and I could not control what we were going to do. There's no way that I'd be able to do that.
Yeah.
So I thought, as I was going through the process, I was watching it unfold, and I was going to my personal therapy and taking it very, very seriously.
Yep.
Um, and we were able to kind of unfold it together and kind of see how things were. And once I decided to get divorced, I needed to get a restraining order at that point because it had gotten to a
Hmm.
really scary point. But I ended up getting through it, and I ended up having support, which was probably the biggest part of it.
Yes.
Realizing I couldn't do it alone and that was okay. That part
Hmm.
was probably one of the most powerful things for me. I always kind of wanted to power through things by myself and get everything done by myself, but I realized I could lean on my therapist. I could lean
Yep.
on my family. I could lean on my friends. I could lean on the domestic violence shelter. I could lean on an
Yeah.
attorney. And I had all these people, and I think I explained it in my story as I had people holding me up when I couldn't stand on my own.
Yes.
So it wasn't
Yes.
me doing it by myself. I didn't have to do it by myself anymore. It was me
Hmm.
realizing that even when I couldn't do it by myself, people would be able to help me along the way.
Yeah. That's really awesome. Was there like when like you, I always wanted to do everything by myself. When I got diagnosed with cancer and my kids were really small, I'm like, I need help. We live very rural right now. How am I going to get them to school? Especially when I'm, totally awful feeling from chemo and like, how am I going to do this? I realized I needed help. We got to take a break, but I'd like to talk about like just that moment you decided, hey, I do need help and I can't
Mhm.
keep holding myself up. Welcome back, everyone, to Transformation with Martine, where we conquer everything and compromise nothing. We're just having a fun little conversation over here. My guest today is Joanna Baanana, and we've been talking about her story. And we left off talking about how I reached a point when I'm always one of those people that's just this just goes, does things on my own, and is more eager to help others than accept help myself. When I got cancer, I know I needed it. So when, Joanna, did you decide that, hey, I do need this help and I can't power through this by myself?
So I think for me, there was actually two moments of that, and I'll kind of explain logically how that makes sense. So my first moment was, as I just mentioned before, I had to call the police. I have never
Yep.
called the police in my life, and it was a scary
Mhm.
moment. And I wouldn't even call 911, which just cracks me up. Like I called the local number from like Google, and I'm like, "Hi, I don't know if this is an emergency," and like it was an
Oh gosh.
emergency.
Yeah.
And they got me to the dispatcher, and I kind of went through the whole process. But once the dust settled and there was a really big, it took about an hour or two, I think, for the whole event to go down. And then the police left and my cousin left. She was with me. I got my kids down for a nap and I was sitting by myself in the quiet kitchen. Like, what just happened? I couldn't believe that the situation that occurred wasn't like a movie I was watching. It was my
Right.
life. And that
Yes.
was when I realized that there was something far beyond my control, that I couldn't handle. I ended up
Mhm.
moving out that night and into my aunt and uncle's house, which was super helpful
Yeah.
for me because I had a place to be safe, a place where I had someone cooking for me, just the little things. I didn't have to clean the
Yeah.
house. I just had a space to just recoup. But I still at that point didn't realize how severe the issue was.
Mhm.
So then I would say probably 3 or 4 days later, I went to my next therapy session and I explained it to my therapist. And I said, this is what's going on. Is there a way that you can help me change how I behave so this doesn't happen anymore? And she was like, what?
Mm.
And I'm like, well,
Oh,
it's
that makes
clearly
me so
my fault.
sad when you say that. Oh
When I
God.
think about who I was then,
Mhm.
and she looked at me and she said, and I'm also grateful for this because a lot of therapists I don't think would have gotten it as well as she did, but she understood
Mhm.
it. And she was like, why
Yeah.
don't you go to the domestic violence shelter and just have a conversation? And I'm like, that is
Mhm.
not what this is. Like, you have no idea what you're talking about. My situation has nothing to do with that. And she said, can you just go? And you'll probably relate to this. I'm a people pleaser. I was like, all right, that's a box on
Mhm.
my checklist. I have to
Yeah.
do it. She told me to. So I went. And I said, no, no, no. I took the packet home. She suggested I read a book. And I read the book in 2 days and just my jaw was open the whole entire time. And I said, wow, this is exactly what I'm going through. And I had
Yeah.
no idea, which blew my mind. I mean, I'm a college
Mhm.
educated woman. I was a mother of two. I was in this
Yeah.
relationship for almost 10 years. How did I not see
Mhm.
it for that long when it was clear patterns if I understood the systemic structure of the relationship? So
Yeah.
that was kind of eye opening, those two moments when I realized A, I have no control over this, that I needed external help immediately, was when I called the
Mhm.
police. And then the second
Mhm.
moment was when I realized I had no control or understanding of my situation. And if I had no understanding of what I was living through, it was time for me to lean against other people who understood what was going on because I clearly had
Right.
no idea.
Right. So, did this start more when your children were born, 1 and 3, or was this your whole marriage?
Pretty much the whole time, but it got worse. So
Mhm.
it was I feel like it's so insidious and I've talked to so many other women. I am a part of the domestic violence shelter that I work for, an
Mhm.
advocacy team for them.
Yeah.
I work with, and I know you said Hope. I'm doing a webinar
Yeah.
next week for the Alliance of Hope, which is just kind of a really good organization to kind of help children and domestic violence victims. And I do a lot of outreach and speak to a lot of women in these situations, but it's just so insidious. So it happens in these tiny little increments where you're able to just brush it off and think that it's not really that serious. And another thing which I've read about in human psychology, when we are with a mate or with a parent or with someone who we're
Mhm.
bonded to, you tend to look at them in a positive light. So like six bad
Yes.
things can happen, but one positive thing happens and you're like, oh, this is the positive thing. We need to focus on this. Everybody makes mistakes. We're not going to worry about it.
Yep.
Unconditional love. And you go into these moments, which in a healthy relationship are absolutely wonderful in the way that our brains work, because you shouldn't get mad if somebody puts the toilet paper roll on wrong or doesn't take the garbage out. Those things should
Mhm.
be looked over for a healthy relationship. But when
Yeah.
you're afraid and belittled and yelled at and hiding behind closed doors because you're afraid you're going to get hurt, those are not the moments that your brain needs to kick in and say, oh, yeah, but he did the dishes the other day. So I feel
Right.
like it's also very psychologically normal to go through these kinds of things and not realize it until it's too late, unless you know what to look out for.
Yeah. As a kid, I mean, I like what you're just saying about the good things and just finding the good things. And I just like, oh God, if I could just be a better girl, if I could just be a better little girl, if I can just stay silent, daddy just got home, and if I can just stay behind the couch or just stay and be okay. And then maybe when he feels better or whatever, then maybe we can talk or, something. I remember being like that, like
Yeah.
and sometimes we go on these little trips and that was fun. And then that kind of erased some of the other stuff.
But that's just how our brains are meant to work. Because if you think
Mm,
about us in the
yeah.
capacity of, I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, we were in more village settings, right? So you
Right.
weren't so dependent on the one person to make sure your life is okay. So like if the person, one person in your village is just being mean or bad or whatever you want to call
Right.
it, you should just go over that and then you go to somebody else. But in the way that
Yeah.
our society has been structured, we do have to depend on usually one or two people in our
Mm-hmm.
lives for the
Yeah.
majority of our mental well-being, which probably
Right.
isn't really healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Good point. Yeah. So you got some help, and then what happened next? You got a restraining order. You're with your aunt and uncle.
Yeah. And then, I mean, the journey kind of goes like most do. I guess it took almost 2+ years to finally get divorced and go through the civil court
Mm-hmm.
system, which is a humongous cluster. I did the math at about for my webinar next week. Out of 48 or 49 months now that I decided from the moment I filed for
Mm-hmm.
divorce to now, I've been in court for 35 of those months. It just is never ending when you're in a situation like this, especially with children. And it's something that it used to aggravate me and get
Mm-hmm.
me anxious and nervous, and I wanted to avoid it. But I've come to the point now where I'm like, this is just going to be the next 13 years of my life. And I just need to buckle down. I need to understand what's going on and do the best that I can and know that this is just the journey that I've been put on. And I do think that I am strong enough and I do think that I am capable enough to be in this
Mm-hmm.
situation. And I do think I'm empowered enough to make changes to help other people. Like I had mentioned
Mm-hmm.
to you a little while back, in my 10-year plan, I want to end up getting into politics. Usually, I
Yeah.
usually say like state because I feel like that's the safe bet to start with,
Mm-hmm.
Senate or House of Representatives or something like that, to be able to start to change laws. Because if I didn't understand what was going on in my relationship that I was in for 10 years, how do
Right.
I expect lawmakers to make laws to affect situations like my own when they have never been in a situation like that? How are they to
Right.
understand it if I couldn't even understand it? So I think instead of just complaining and saying how horrible situations are and systems are, I need to be one of the people to use my voice and to be loud and proud about it and help other people that come after me.
That's
And
awesome. It's
that's what I
awesome.
want
It's
to
a
do.
perfect reframe. You're getting what you need to be able to do something much bigger
Yeah.
later. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So, as someone who doesn't know, why is he able to keep taking you to court?
It's called post-separation abuse. So from what
Hmm.
I've understood with the situation and as far as I've studied it, which is pretty extensively, the basis of abusive relationships and toxic relationships are power and control. So you have one party
Mm-hmm.
that just wants to have power and control. Just
Yeah.
because you leave, it doesn't end. So what better way to have power and control over someone who has left you than to keep bringing them back to court? That's financial, that's emotional, that's psychological. All the other things are in play because now I don't have to respond to certain things. I don't have to respond to the stimulus of emails or phone calls. I can say this is my life and this is how I'm going to choose to live it. And because that external force can't be put on me, there's got to be another way. So until court systems realize these patterns of behavior, because right now they look at the case like, okay, these are two loving parents that just can't get along, which that
Mm.
isn't really the case, but they
Yeah.
can't understand it because they haven't been in situations or been trained on situations like this. So when they look
Mm.
at it with that lens, they just see both parents in the wrong. So you're kind of at a disadvantage to try to explain yourself. You don't want to over explain, you don't want to under explain. And it's very tricky to show evidence. Civil courts don't want to deal with these situations. I mean, I don't want to deal with the
Mm.
situation, so I get it. I wish I could just walk away, but
Yeah.
I'm not able to. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I feel like
Yeah.
it's
It's
just
just,
one
it
of
seems
those.
like it shouldn't be, like he shouldn't be able to do this, because to me it seems like it's definitely, well, it is a way of control. It is abusive in my eyes. Like, why is he allowed to do this? You know, you guys are apart. The kids are cared for by you. I mean, what is he trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so it ebbs and flows. So like
Yeah.
when we weren't in court for those few months, he wouldn't take the kids and he wouldn't do this, he
Mm.
wouldn't do that. And then as soon as he says he wants 50-50 custody, and then now he's taking the kids and he's doing everything that he wants because there was a call from my daughter's therapist about something that had happened and he was mad about it. So that's the retaliation. But
Mm.
once you get lawyers involved and now you have all these people paying these large bills, I mean the attorneys kind of want these things to keep going. I mean it
Yeah,
it
for sure.
so it's not as though you're coming in and we're both just screaming and fighting in front of a judge or anything like that. Now it's this big, huge, almost like a theatrical performance, and he gets to say like, oh, it's so hard, and do his little thing. So
Yeah.
it is very tricky, but that's the way that they continue to exert that. And I do agree, it shouldn't be able to be allowed. Once the patterns of behavior are noticed, it should be dealt with in the proper way, but that's just not the way that the court systems currently work.
Yeah.
And that's why I need to use my voice to kind of help with that.
Well, I'm glad you're doing this, because I know it's something that's very necessary. I've heard a lot of different stories. Never have delved in so much, like you have, but it's definitely something that needs to be done. So what, so you're talking about going into politics, but what is your, well, we're gonna take a break, I guess, but what is like your next step to, before getting into politics? What is your next step before that? And we'll talk about that, I guess, when we get back. Okay. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll be right back. Welcome to the place where we conquer everything and compromise nothing. Real, raw, vulnerable conversations. My guest today is Joanna Baanana, and we are talking about her story in our book, When the Wellness War. Contributing authors. Yes, and our Peggy and Marcus are authors, the ones who put this all together. Thank you to them. This has been quite the journey for me. It's my second and Joanna's first time in the series, and it's been a journey for all of us. So we left off with me asking you like your next steps, you heading to politics when your kids get older. But for now, what are your next steps to help other women that have been in environments like yours?
So I think for me, I've kind of set these all up. Currently, I am a part of several advisory boards to just be able to help with my community. So first thing I do is Girl Scouts. I'm a Girl Scouts leader. I
That's
think
good. Yeah.
teaching women at 8 years old and younger, just
Yep.
to be able to learn to express themselves, have a place to be vulnerable, have a place where they feel safe and
Yeah.
seen and secure. I think that's a really big part of kids growing up that we all don't realize that we need. So that's one of my steps. I think another one, I just got certified to be able to go into schools with the domestic violence shelter that I volunteer for, to teach kids and high schoolers about healthy relationships. So I don't think when it comes to toxic and abusive relationships, we really need to go in there and tell them all the red flags and scare them to pieces. Because as we said before, a lot of times you just work against yourself cognitively in those situations. But if we teach them what a healthy relationship looks like, and then they start to see things that might not be in that bucket, they may start to think, oh, you know what? I'm losing this part of myself, or I used to love going to the movies, and now he tells me I'm not allowed to go to the movies, or I used to love to hang out with my friends, and she won't let me go hang out with my friends. Maybe this isn't something that I want to be a part of, because relationships should enrich our lives. They shouldn't reduce our lives. So that's another part of it. I also just got accepted into a town committee where I live on the family and children's advisory board for my town. So I think that's another place that I'd be able to use some of those skills to be able to start talking about healthy relationships and things that need to be done. I'm part of a group advisory board for Connecticut Protective Moms. And we have advocacy that we do, and just kind of have community, which helps, where you meet women that are in similar situations. So you're not just kind of flying solo. And just being able to talk to some of those women and hear the stories that they've gone through, and some of their kids are older, some of their kids are younger, some of their kids are the same age, just being able to be with each other and laugh at things that really aren't funny that other people might not understand is so super helpful. And then know that together, while we're doing that, while we're helping other women, is just going to help us. Like a few weeks ago, I drove and gave hand-me-down clothes to a woman who just had left a dangerous situation, and she didn't have clothes for her 5-year-old. Well, even though that's something so small and tiny, I just know that for her, getting a hug and getting 3 bags of clothes was probably more than she ever thought would happen if she left. So just being there for people and learning how we do really work better in a community than we do isolated. I think that is my direct next step. into getting out there. And then, as I mentioned, to you alone, I wrote a memoir, so that's in the editing
Yes.
phase, so that's pretty exciting. And I think getting that out there and getting my message out there is something that's going to be hopefully helpful to other women, and kind of educate people too, to understand how it happens, and how it gets as bad as it gets without you really realizing it.
Absolutely. One of the things that you said was, talking about showing showing a child, or even showing just a young woman or whatever, or an older woman. Heck, I mean, if you don't know any different, you don't know any different what a healthy relationship looks like, whether it's a marriage, a mother, father, child relationship looks like, because I've heard that so many times. I've been doing this show for a while now, and I have a background in radio anyway. And people that I've interviewed, it's like, I've been like, gosh, I've been through a lot myself, but golly, I can't imagine what you've been through. And it's like, I don't know any different.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it was just everyday, normal life. It's not anything. I didn't know that there was anything outside of this.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things I think leaving gave me the power to be able to create, because even though obviously there's children involved, so you have to share
Yes.
custody in some element, in some way, but as time has gone by, I've realized I'm giving my children the gift of perspective, which I was never given. So they do
Yeah.
get to go and live in two places. And in one place, I don't know what happens, and I can't pretend that I do. In another place, I can make sure that if they're having a bad day or a good day or whatever, we're going to be able to talk about our feelings. We're going to be able to be seen. I mean, I have a list of things that I say to my kids every day at bedtime. I usually pick 3 or 4, but they usually go along the lines of, I always wanted you, I love you no matter what. If something stands out, I'll say, I love you if you make a good choice or a bad choice. Like, I love you if you spill paint all over the floor, and I love you if you clean it all up, just to give them that
Yeah.
idea that I never had growing up. And like, I always wanted you, that makes somebody feel valued, that makes somebody
For
feel like they're
sure.
not there by mistake. And I think just teaching them those things and putting those little nuggets in their head, especially
Yeah.
at bedtime, hopefully when they grow up, they are able to talk to themselves in a similar way, because I think our inner voices are created by our parents, because those are the first
For
voices
sure.
that we hear about ourselves. So if they go to sleep, and if they wake up thinking that they're valuable people, I hope that they grow up to think they're valuable people.
Yeah, that's really, I like that, because I guess I could say that one of the things that my dad did do for me, now that you're saying that, is like, he always told me that my mom wanted me, even if he didn't want kids, she did. And that was like, at least that was something that he did for me, because I did know that she wanted me. Yeah. Is it scary for you? And to me, it doesn't feel right that your kids go to him.
I have no choice. It's one of those things I've had to reframe.
Yeah.
Radical acceptance more than anything else. It used to really scare me, and it used to really um, give me anxiety, but I can't control it, and I can do everything in my power to use my voice to hopefully help them. But if I'm legally ordered to do something, I need to do that, and
Yeah.
I need to hope that it doesn't affect them too much, I guess.
Right.
So
Right.
that mindset was how it all started, but I've had to reframe. And I feel like as they get
Right.
older, it gets a little bit easier too, because they're able to talk about it, they're able to say things. My daughter is a therapist, so I know that that's helpful for her to get some things out, neutral third party for her to say things to, that she doesn't
Yeah.
have to worry. And hopefully in time, with enough advocacy and training and all the things that I can possibly do, if my daughter has children, they won't be in that situation, or her friends' children won't be in that situation. I mean,
Right.
I can't change it right now, but I can change it in the future. And I wouldn't be able to if I wasn't in this situation, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's probably going to be a point, like all the stuff that you're doing, even if they're very little, but there's probably going to be a point where, like, I understand some of the things you were doing, Mom. I understand why you were setting us up for our futures. Yeah, there will be a time where they see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's my
Yeah.
legacy, right?
Yes. Yes. I am kind of in that it was a different environment for me getting divorced, but I have kind of gotten the affirmations, the reiteration, whatever you want to say, that, okay, Mom, I understand things now. I understand why this had to happen. I understand. I just understand. And it's like it's really good. My kids are obviously a lot older than you, and it took a long time, but I'm grateful to have gotten that. It's a peacefulness over my heart that, okay, we made it okay, and they are okay. And yeah, I did what I needed to do for me, but I knew it was the best for them, because if I was going to stay in an environment of what I was in, it wasn't good for anybody.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
they get the perspective too, they get to see what that felt like, and then they get to see what safety feels like.
Yeah.
Which is something I don't really think I grew up with understanding. So,
Right.
know.
Yeah, I
And
certainly did not.
I'm not sure if it was The Body Keeps the Score or there was another book by Nadine Burke called The Deepest Well, but it also talks about you really needing one safe adult in your life to be able to get past all the yeses on your ACE score. I mean, you could have a
Yeah.
litany of them, but if you have one safe place, and now imagine if that one safe place is where you spend the majority of your time. So I feel like
Yeah.
thinking about it in that way, I can focus on providing that. And if I'm so anxious and worried and nervous about what's happening on the other hand, I'm not going to be able to create that safe, warm, loving place, right? Because it's going to be conflicting in my mind too. So I have to focus on what I can control and what I can create and what I can manifest for them, as
Right.
opposed to what I can't, because that's right. That's just going to cause more anxiety and more fear and more bad feelings. And I got to
Yes.
focus on what I can for the good. And another thing
Yeah.
I think of, and I don't know where I've read this, it wasn't original to me, but they're going to be adults far longer than they're going to be children. So I got to do what I can while they're little. And then for the majority of their life, they're not going to be living here needing me to cook their meals. They're going to be
Yeah.
living their life, and we're going to have a relationship much different than what we have now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That is like, that's something my mom always said too. It's like you're little for so short of a time. And I tried to keep that in mind with my kids the whole time, and all the decisions that I made. They're little for such a short time. Not only is it spending time, but just making sure that they were in the best environment they could be in, and doing the best I could for them. And like you, the reiteration of, God, you're so good. And you're the greatest gift I've ever had. And my kids are the greatest gift, hands down, I've ever received. So grateful for that. So yeah, it's just, it's filling them up.
One thing I say to my daughter a lot is, before you came along, I was just Joanna, but after you decided to come, I became Mom, and that's one of my favorite jobs.
Oh, I love that.
And then she feels like responsible, for being my joy.
Yeah. Oh, that's really awesome. I love that. Yeah. Where can people find you, Joanna, even though it's out right now? I mean, it's out.
So my LinkedIn, Joanna Baanana, my link tree is Joanna Baanana, Facebook, Joanna Baanana, Instagram, Joanna Baanana. So just use the 2 A's, Baanana. You could Google me and find me pretty easily. And my website should be done by the end of the year, and that'll be the ultimate way to find me.
That's great. So we're going to take a break, everyone, and we'll come back with Joanna's final thoughts. Thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome back, everyone, to Transformation with Martine. We have real, raw, vulnerable conversations here. My guest today is Joanna Baanana, and we've been talking about her story of the abusive environment that she lived in with her husband, and breaking free of that, and just finding her strength in herself, plus being able to ask other people for help, which is very brave as well. So Joanna is writing a memoir that is going to come out in the next year, you said?
Year or two. I'm in the editing process, so it kind of depends on how long. I'm just on the roller coaster, I don't know.
Yeah, and it is, even just the anthologies that I've done, it's still kind of it's a ride for sure. But then your own full book, I imagine that's my next step. So I imagine that's even more so.
Yeah. And it took 3 years to write it. So I feel like when I was writing, I'm like, oh, it's going to be over and it'll publish as soon as I'm done writing it. Now I've been done writing it for 5 months now. It's in editing.
Yeah.
I had to find the right editor that spoke to me, so that was like an interview process, and now she's got
Yeah.
it, so she's reading through it. But yeah, it's a completely different process. Like I said, this is my first book, and I say that specifically because I want to write more. So
Yeah.
this is the first of many, I would like to say.
Yes,
And
for sure.
yeah, and so I'm going to learn the process, right? And that's how you learn things. You just got to do them.
You gotta just
I
do
always
it.
say, if you want to be a writer, start writing. If you want to play the
Exactly.
piano, start playing the piano. It's the only
Yeah,
way you're going to be able to do these things.
exactly. And just do it. Doesn't matter how scary it is, you gotta just do it.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
But
So we were talking on break a little bit about the name of your memoir, and yeah, a little bit about that would probably tell us a little bit about that conversation. And um I think it would be helpful to someone, but also just knowing that people are not alone.
yeah, so I hope the book title sticks. Again, you never know in this process. It could stick,
Yeah.
it could not stick. But the title that I've given it so far is "It's All Your Fault." That's kind of like I told you on the break, my childhood wound. I feel like I was
Yeah.
constantly blamed for everything. And there there was an Alanis Morissette song named "It's All Your Fault," and it was such a predominant wound for me that even my neighborhood friends would say, "Oh, this is your song," because it was
Wow.
just
Yeah.
known that everybody knew everything was always my fault. No matter what happened, I was always blamed. But I mean, that's just part of my story. But
Hmm.
the reason I chose it for my book was because that kind of continued to be my story until I decided to leave. And once I decided to leave, it was obviously a long process of finding my
Yeah.
voice and finding my power and finding the courage to tell my story. But once I did that, I realized it was all my fault. Leaving was all my
Hmm.
fault. The choices that I made were all my fault. And fault wasn't necessarily a negative thing anymore. I could take control of what that word meant, and I can take control of what my story was going to be. So
Yeah.
it's all your fault became powerful as opposed to just shame and blame and guilt.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So if there's a woman who, she reads your story, which, there's going to be many reading this book, who reads your stories, The Fruits of My Struggles, um, and your memoir coming up, and what would you say to someone who's like, oh boy, this is me?
Yeah. So I actually put a quote at the end of I have my copy here too. I put a quote
Yeah.
at the end of it, which I believe all the stories have one. And I would just
They
like to
do.
read that if that's okay, because I think that
Yeah.
that perfectly would be what I would want. And it's from our favorite young Pueblo.
Uh-huh.
Um, True power is living in the realization that you are your own healer, hero, and leader. It is
Yes.
when you share your truth with compassion and peace, your power grows when you make progress in your own freedom and wisdom. Those who are truly powerful do not harm themselves or others. Instead, they use their energy to enrich all they know with love. And I
Mm.
just think that that perfectly explains it, because telling my story could be a negative thing in the capacity that I decide to tell it. I could blame, I could use, I can't believe
Sure.
this happened to me. This is so gross. He is such a terrible person. That's not the way I want to tell my story. I want to
Sure.
tell my story as this is something that happened to me and I chose to do something about it. This is my
Yes.
story. This is my place of beginning. And I wish I could have known the things that I learned at 35 years old and decided to
Hmm.
change. I wish those were things that were in my head for my whole entire life, but they weren't. But the beauty of living is the beauty of being able to reframe your mind and your thought process. And I was able
Yes.
to do that, and I was able to use my neural pathways in a different way, and I was able to
Yeah.
change the way that I thought and change the way that I wanted to live my life. And if I can do it, anyone can do it. And lean against people. It's okay to not be okay and do it by yourself. you
Hmm.
don't you don't need to be the lone ranger and solve everything alone. That's not the way humans were intended to live.
No.
I do believe we were intended to live with the environment all around us, the people all around us. We do
Hmm.
better in community.
Yeah. 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 I remember just thinking that, yes, I need this help, but hey, I've always done it alone. I can continue to do it. And I said, no, this is the way we're supposed to be. We are supposed to connect. And when we do connect, it's like, I remember somebody telling me, we had just gone to lunch, and she's like, well, she goes, I'm buying lunch today. I'm like, oh, you don't have to do that. And she's like, don't take away the gift I want to give you. I'm like, oh gosh, that really set in my mind, and that kind of eased the thing, allowing of people to help me too, because I've always done stuff like that. And I've always been the one to take other people's kids to school, or, whatever the case may be. So why wouldn't I let them do something for me? That's kind of selfish, and it's just not right. You're taking something away from somebody,
One of the
Yeah.
things I said I talk with a group of moms
Mhm.
is there's such a very, very, very large group of us that come into the beginning of this and they're constantly, I'm sorry about everything. I'm sorry I couldn't answer the phone. I'm sorry I didn't get back to your text. I'm sorry I didn't see your email. I'm sorry. And my whole thing is we don't need to be sorry about anything anymore. Unless you're doing
Yeah.
something to purposefully hurt me, I need an apology. But if not, let's just reframe it. Thank you for being patient. I was doing something with my kid. Thank you for the grace. We're all going to
Yes.
read a text message from time to time, put the phone down, think we responded and didn't. And that's okay. We're
Exactly.
human. So instead of saying I'm sorry, say thank you. And now we'll get on group texts or group calls and everyone will be like, oh no, Joanna's here. Don't say you're sorry. Don't say you're sorry.
Yeah.
And it's good because again, that's changing your pathways. That's changing the way that your brain
Yeah.
works. Your neuropathology is always, I'm sorry, it's my fault. You need to stop that because it's not. And you are able
Yeah.
to take control and you're able to just say thank you. And I think that goes
Yeah.
into a similar thread of what you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. That's yeah, that's really good. Yeah. So if you just happen to be in I always happen to say Starbucks, even though I'm not a Starbucks fan. If you just happen to be in the line with somebody and somebody just happens to hear a bit of your story or something, what would you say to them?
I would probably want to give them a hug. 'Cause
Yeah, I would too.
And just
Yep.
say, we're capable of hard things. I mean, we really are.
We
I hate
are.
thinking resiliency and we need to be resilient because we shouldn't have to be resilient. But the fact of the world is we're not going to be able to keep ourselves from harm completely. And you
Right.
know what? Like fruits of my struggle, if I didn't go through what I went through, I wouldn't be where I am today. I would still be floating around in the realm of the world that I was in. So because of hard things, we can become better. We just have to be able to kind of look deep within and look into ourselves and find what we need to come out the other end.
Yeah.
So if you're going through something hard and if you're going through something that is scary to you, it's okay. Continue on, one foot in front of the other, and eventually you're going to look back and be so proud of yourself. Like now, I bought my own house. I live in a home that I purchased by
Yes.
myself. I have a job
Yes.
that I'm able to keep that pays all my bills. I've been able to continue to go to court with an attorney because my house worth went up with the boom of COVID and all these other different things. The
Yeah,
universe will provide.
it
It will
does.
give you the tools
Yep.
that you need to survive if you just let it.
Ah, I love that. And trusting yourself too.
Mhm.
Listen to those guided, because we're always being led by God, by the universe, however you want to look at it. I'm a God girl, so I like to say that God is leading me.
Mhm.
And I need to listen. And I know when I do listen and surrender, like it's a word you use in your book there, when you surrender, things start getting aligned for you. What is your path, your purpose, everything. And you kind of start to see why you've gone through all that you have, because it's led you here.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. This has been good. This has been a great conversation.
I've had a
I
good
appreciate
time.
you.
I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We will see you next week, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And if you have a story of overcoming, you have a story that you want to share as well that will help others, reach out to me. And maybe we'll set up a time to chat and see about you being on the show. Again, thank you for tuning in. See you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to Transformation with Martine, real, raw, and vulnerable conversations. Listen or watch live every Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern on TransformationTalkRadio.com as Martine and her guests have deep, meaningful conversations, sharing empowering stories. Step into your passions and lead with your heart. If you are ready to accept and love you for you, visit MartineEmmons.com and start allowing transformation to happen today.